Alright, what's going on, guys? Ever since Elden Ring's release back in 2022, FromSoftware has had the gaming industry in a stranglehold, being at the top of their game and in the center of almost every conversation. But now that we've gotten the DLC for Elden Ring, confirmation that it is the one and only, we're now at a point where we have to start looking to the future and asking, well, what are they going to do next? How are they going to top this? And can they capture that same lightning in a bottle that they did with this monumental success? Now we can sit here and talk about the possibility of another Armored Core, a Sekiro 2, or even a Bloodborne 2, but what I think is far more interesting is operating under the assumption that we're not getting any of those next, or even another Elden Ring game, but rather something new. Because I've been playing a lot of Black Myth Wukong lately, which has quickly become one of my favorite games of all time, and the foundation of that game is heavily based on the Souls formula. But Black Myth Wukong has left me feeling an almost insatiable curiosity at what FromSoftware could do if they push the bounds of their tried and true formula. Now believe me, I understand if it ain't broke, don't fix it, but history has shown that FromSoftware does their best work when they're being experimental. So today I want to go through several things that I think they could do in their next installment to not only shake things up, but reinvent the Souls genre into something that could potentially be even better. Now I want to start off with one of the things that stuck out to me the most about Black Myth Wukong, and that is pulling from the real world. I absolutely loved learning more and more about Chinese mythology and Journey to the West as a novel through playing the game. Now FromSoftware has done this before with Sekiro to an extent, while still maintaining the fantasy of that world. It was built upon historical ideas, places, and time periods. Now don't get me wrong, the fantasy worlds that Miyazaki creates are among the best, but aside from the satisfying gameplay, what I think FromSoftware excels at more than anybody is creating foundational lore that oftentimes finds its basis in very obscure older books, games, or media that the vast majority of people won't know about. Now obviously in pretty much all of FromSoftware's games you can throw a dart anywhere in their worlds and you'll have a high chance of hitting something pulled from Berserk, but aside from that, in Elden Ring we saw a lot pulled from old game books, and especially from things like Magic the Gathering. Now I don't say that to discredit any of FromSoftware's ideas, I say that to illustrate that these talents would work very well if put to pull from things in history, mythologies, or lesser known cultures, and not just for inspiration of the new lore, but making those part of the lore, kinda like how Wukong did it, where they created a new story, but built upon the original story of Journey to the West. The points of lore hunting in FromSoftware's games that I've enjoyed the most personally are when it can teach me something about the real world that I didn't already know. For example, some of you guys might remember back when Elden Ring was first announced, a lot of us were under the impression that the game was going to draw heavily from Celtic mythology, and it did to an extent visually, but during that time I was very heavily researching Celtic mythology because of that, and it was a blast to learn about. I want more of that, and I think it can help the lore side of things quite a bit, especially like we saw with Elden Ring's DLC, where by the end of it, there were so many questions that were left unanswered, so many pivotal things in the story that we'll never have closure about. And yes, that is FromSoftware's forte, that's nothing new, but drawing from things in reality, the lore hunt doesn't have to end with the game, and I think that opens up a lot more opportunity to be even more obscure about things that don't have to be explicitly stated within the game itself. Now I'm not saying I want them to necessarily go the God of War route where almost all of the story is pulled directly from mythology, but I think you guys understand what I'm saying here, and that may not be everybody's cup of tea, but I personally find myself enjoying stories the most when they seem to go beyond the game itself. Which kind of leads me into my next point, and again these are purely personal opinions after a decently long break with Elden Ring. And I don't know about you guys, I can't lie, I'm pretty fatigued with the Berserk style dark fantasy medieval Europe setting. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but it's been the same vibe ever since the beginning. Dark fantasies where everything's dead, the world is bleak and past its prime, and we pick up the pieces of bygone ages. Now that FromSoftware has hit that cap with Elden Ring, a pinnacle that's going to be very hard to reach again, they have the opportunity to completely shake it up and try something that they haven't done before. And one of the aspects I think they should try to shake up is the game's tone and atmosphere. We don't have to operate on the assumption that different equals bad. Let's see what they could try in a world that's living, still in its prime, with bustling cities, more characters to interact with things happening in that world around us. It would be a tricky thing to pull off, but I think it could pull out a new side of FromSoftware that we haven't seen before, where the same themes aren't getting repeated in each of their games, such as where realistically, if you aren't super well brushed up on the lore, you could be confused and think that Elden Ring and Dark Souls are in the same world. I'm not trying to knock any of those, just to illustrate the point here. Or we could see a new type of setting entirely. I'm still holding out hope for a sci-fi Souls game, or a pirate-themed game with a vibe kinda like Bloodborne. In the way that Sekiro took the Dark Souls formula, tried many new things and a new setting, let's diverge in that way again. We've seen with Armored Core 6 that they're perfectly capable of exploring different settings, creating really good character arcs outside of a dark world, so I think in the event that they did try something new like that, a lot of people would be surprised with what they could pull off. Beyond all that, I think another area they should experiment in is expanding the social features of their games. Now, I've never been shy about being a solo purist Souls player, but I also think these games have never been properly balanced to handle co-op. And with the insane popularity of the seamless co-op mod, people want to play these games with friends. And I think there's much better ways to do it than just summoning for a boss fight or an area. And this is something that Miyazaki said he's looking at for their next game, taking inspiration from multiplayer games. However, I don't think the solution is to keep things the same, or even to integrate exactly what seamless co-op does. I think they need to completely rethink the idea of how multiplayer works, and what can be achieved through it. And frankly, I think they need to look at old MMOs. Now, I know that word is going to make a lot of people cringe, but hear me out. Old MMOs got the concept down right of social spaces, where even if the game was primarily solo based on your own adventure, there were parts of the world where you would encounter many other players. For example, being at the game's main hub, you would see lots of other players on their journeys, interacting with the area as well. Imagine, for example, you have a lobby of 10 players at a time in Roundtable Hold, where you can interact with each other, send invitations for co-op or duels, etc. Kinda like the game already does with the spirits, but the players are actually there. Or imagine, for example, if the game treated certain boss fights like actual dungeon bosses in MMOs, where say you're going to do the Radahn fight, a fight designed around summons, but the game puts you in with other players instead of the pre-made NPCs. I remember back in Destiny 1, the game had the Vault of Glass raid, and the entrance to that dungeon was in one of the game's main zones. And if you were just a normal player going about your missions, or playing in that area, you could encounter parties of people starting the raid and doing that first encounter, and you could hop in and help them even if you weren't doing the raid yourself. Things like that had such a big impact on making the world feel more alive, and I'm not saying I want the next Souls game to be an MMO, however, I do think they could pull a lot from the multiplayer aspects of MMOs that I think players would really enjoy. Also, bring back Covenants, please. The final suggestion I want to talk about today is that whatever their next game is, I think it's time once again to switch up how the combat works. In the way that Bloodborne and Sekiro took the foundations of the Souls series and twisted them into something new that worked, I think it's once again time to try something new just like that. Armored Core 6 felt way too fun to play for them not to experiment more with movement. Now, obviously, I'm not saying we need to be piloting mechs in the next Souls game or zipping around the world everywhere. I'm saying that they're perfectly capable of innovation that works and is addicting. Now, I actually think Black Myth Wukong did this extremely well, and I do know that a lot of people don't like the light feeling of that game, but you could move around very well, and the control you had over your character was extremely satisfying and responsive. And even though you were primarily limited to a dodge roll, you could still get very creative with the way you avoid the enemy's movements and how you tackle each situation. And I would like to see FromSoftware add a new core movement feature that maybe doesn't replace the dodge roll, but adds to your arsenal to avoid damage. But those are just some things I'm thinking about when imagining FromSoftware's next installment. Of course, it's just purely my opinion, and I'd like to hear what you guys would like to see in their next game too. Y'all let me know down in the comments section below. With all that though, if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to leave a like on it and subscribe if you're new around here. But with all that, I will catch you in the next one.